Hi, and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom, a life lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week we are talking all about unhealthy coping strategies and healthy coping strategies and breaking down the difference between the two. Now, when life gets tough, many people choose ways of coping that make the problem, the stress, the trauma, and the lasting negative impact so much worse. In this teaching, we'll be explaining how you can change today by choosing healthier, more balanced, and authentic ways of coping with life's ups and downs. Okay, David, so I know you work with a lot of clients who struggle with unhealthy coping strategies. How do these typically manifest? What would you say an unhealthy coping strategy is?
I think the umbrella word, the overriding word that I would describe is avoidance. So when you're meeting difficult circumstances, difficult people, difficult events in your life or in the reality that you're living, a lot of my clients will choose avoidance strategies. And that may cover lots of things, such as overeating, overworking, physically avoiding a situation, mentally avoiding a situation, switching off. It could be drinking too much, smoking too much. And all of these are typical avoidance strategies rather than addressing and dealing with the issue at hand.
And so when you say avoidance, David, are people actually avoiding the problem situation or the problem person, or are they avoiding the feelings, the red light emotional feelings, those yucky feelings that the problem situation or the problem person is creating within them?
Well, this is where it gets confusing because they conflate the two. They conflate the situation or the person and their feelings as one of the same. That's why in every video, you know what I'm going to say now. It's so important. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim of it. So as you just said, Alex, what they do, they get those two issues confused. The situation, the person, the event, the future maybe event, and their emotions become engulfed in one. And then then you'll hear them using words like overwhelmed, it's too much for me. Then they'll fall into the three lies, I can't cope, I'm not good enough, I'm unlovable. And then that begins the carousel of despair. That's when they go round and round and it becomes a confirmation bias and a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And so would you say that, I get what you're saying about the problem is real, the problem situation, the problem person may be a very real issue, but the way your clients choose to think about it and bring their emotions and the problem together make it much, much worse.
Yes, so you have to accept that in the reality that we live in, we cannot not have problems, if that makes sense. There is always going to be issues, there are always going to be difficulties, there's always going to be challenges. And that's why we entitled this series Life Lessons, because in those challenges, that's where you will be able to contact deeply to your Shen, to your spirituality, and learn the lesson that's being presented to you during this life journey. But a lot of clients have almost convinced themselves that they can't deal with this, they can't cope with it. The emotions that they're going to experience will be too overwhelming. So as I said, what they do is to merge the two together. And it makes it almost impossible for them to deal with it or see a way through it. Yeah. And I will always say with my clients who come to me with the kind of the statement, I can't cope, it always amazes me because when you look at their amazing lives, they are a coping machine. They have always coped. They always will cope. And what I say to them, what we've got to do is to get those skills so you cope more eloquently, more easily, more in your flow. And that's what Wu Mei means, being in your flow, rather than trying to avoid or to control external issues home and develop your coping skills so you cope through it much more authentically and truthfully.
And I know one of the members of our Facebook community said when we were discussing this concept of you can cope, you've always coped, they've said, yeah, but for every challenging life situation that I have come through, I can see, obviously, I'm still here, I'm still alive, but it's like I come out the other side like completely traumatized. And so what we're talking about here is we all have to face these difficult, challenging situations. Being in our Wu Wei flow doesn't necessarily mean that the challenge is not going to be difficult, it's not going to be hard, but for sure it means we can come out less unscathed. Would that be the right way, or more in balance with what's happening?
I would say more in balance, or my word would be more in your flow. So the person who said, I come out of these events more traumatized, you see what they're still describing to you is they're still connected to their emotions, and they still have not accepted that they create the emotions. So let me make this clear for you if you get misunderstood. I am not saying you should not create emotions. I am saying emotions are healthy, normal, and if you're in a certain situation, creating an emotion of anger or frustration can sometimes be helpful, but you must remember that you are creating that emotion. You are not the victim of the emotion. So as that client said, they've come through, they've coped, but they're traumatized. And that means that they haven't resolved the emotion. They've joined the event and the emotion together as one. And we've got to look at it, as I call it with my clients. I've mentioned this before in the videos. A, B, C. A is the event, situation, or the person, external to you. B is what you believe and what you think, and your strategies, your coping mechanisms. C, your emotions. A, B, C. So that's the process that happens. For a lot of my clients, they don't go A, B, C. They go A, C, B. A, the event. C, the emotion. B, then they try and deal with the emotion. They get those two round the wrong way. And when you think about this, every event, and the emotion that's created, you are creating that emotion. Where you can make a difference in your life today, as Alex says in the introduction, today, take full responsibility for your emotions. Make sure that they're appropriate. Make sure they're going to help you through this situation. You are the creator of your emotions. You are not the victim. So don't put your coping mechanisms to be able to cope with your emotion. Put your coping mechanisms to deal with the event.
Yeah. So you're saying your ways of coping, your ways of logically thinking about, okay, so what options have I got here? What response could I have here? How can I tackle this problem? We want that to be 100% focused on the real situation rather than it being 100% focused on managing our out of control emotions.
Doesn't that sound easy, Alex? But it's so difficult. That A, B, C. Do not just because you are creating the emotion, but you create the emotion like in a blink of an eye. You don't even think about it. And why this teaching is so fundamentally important is if you just consider, as you're sitting here watching me, go past some of the difficult events or not so difficult events and remember your emotion and think, now, what was my thought process? What was my thinking, my belief to create that? And that gives you the A, B, C. Do not go A, C, B. Because once you create the emotion without your responsibility, you've now not only dealing with the event, the stimulus, the situation, the person, you're also dealing with your emotion, and those two are together. And now you've got an even bigger problem. And I want you to be focused on the event because I know And the evidence is, you know too, you have always coped. You're very good at coping. I can understand you listening to me say, but David, I don't want to cope. I want to have this lovely life. Wouldn't it be great? I call it bunny rabbits jumping around in the fields and roses growing around my door and everybody happy and everybody smiling and everybody agreeing with me. But that's not the reality that we live in. And I know you don't want to cope, but we have to cope. And actually, that's what is defining you as a spiritual, awesome person that you are. The way that you cope, the techniques that you use will be different to everyone else. Everyone else has got a different, unique style. And we're trying to encourage you to develop your style so that you cope in your flow, authentically, in balance, and I would say connected to your Shen, not connected to your emotions. So you're thinking clearly, you're going down to your spirituality, you're basing your decisions on the events based on truth, honesty, and integrity, not on an emotional feeling.
And so this is really where the inner child is involved, because when you explain the ABC logically like that and map it all out, it's quite clear. However, when we hit a problem, a roadblock, something unexpected, it can be very easy just to allow our fearful inner child to kick off, to go into panic mode, because is it our inner child that is holding on to the lie within our belief system that, oh, I'm not going to be able to cope with this. This is going to be a problem. Life should be easy. I shouldn't have to deal with this. It's really it's not our logical, mature adult mind that is saying that. It's our inner child.
That's right. So we use the term inner child because I think that description gives you lots of advantages than using words like ego or emotional mind or your subconscious mind. So you're absolutely right. So when that part of your mind, and we've done many, literally nearly hundreds of videos on the inner child. So if you're interested in the concept of the inner child part of your mind, please look in the archives and you'll see all the background on this. But your inner child, and remember, all this happens like a blink of an eye. I know you don't sit there and think it through and consider it and meditate on it. It happens like a blink of an eye, that your inner child takes over in that instance. And a lot of my clients will say something like, I've watched your videos, David. I 100% that I agree, I create my emotions. And then they use that 3-letter word, but. And when you use the word but, it means that you haven't fully accepted that you create your emotions. Remember, I'm not saying you shouldn't create emotions. I'm not saying emotions are wrong. Emotions are wonderful, but you are the creator. And if you have that slight bit of doubt that you are still not creating your emotions, then as Alex has just said, when those life-changing events come into your life, the inner child immediately goes into a kind of a protection kind of a mode where he then they'll say things like, I can't cope, this is overwhelming, this is too much, somebody else should step in and sort it out, this always happens to me, why, and all like that. And it just carries on and carries on. Everybody's slightly different, so I want to be careful of using words, because you might say, well, I don't say that. But it's that same type of thing where now you're being led by that part of the mind that I call the inner child. It's like having a dog that's pulling you around. And so the mind is pulling you around. You see, so instead of now focusing on the event, you're focusing on everything else. And the event is still there. And then it's like gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you start using the words like overwhelming. I can't cope. It's all too much for me. This always happens to me. All words like that.
And because I'm really interested in the inner child strategies, the response strategies in this regard. I can see that maybe if we turn to overeating or eating unhealthy foods, or if we turn to maxing out on our credit card, or we turn to drinking as almost like a comfort avoidance, that's an inner child strategy.
Yes.
I can see from what you've said, the inner child within us will start using words like, this is a big problem, it's overwhelming, and almost it's like the inner child almost wants to make the problem worse, so then it can create a justification for avoiding it. Because would you say like the inner child kind of secretly knows that actually now as an adult, we should be able to cope with this situation. But if I can make it much, much worse, if I can make my emotions really bad, if I can get really stressed, really anxious, really depressed about this and, just inflame the whole thing, then that allows me to kind of step back because
to justify.
Yeah, because nobody would be able to cope with the bigness of this situation.
Exactly. And so that's exactly what the inner child does. And if you think about, that's why, again, I like the analogy of the inner child. So if you look at a physical child of 6, 7, 8, they will readily use their emotions. They will have temper tantrums, strops. They will throw themselves to the floor. They will cry, scream to get what they want. And so that's why the analogy of the inner child does exactly the same. As you just quite rightly said, they will overinflate the problem. They will make it so immense so they can justify you going and having another cream cake. They can justify you racking up your credit card bill. They will give you all of these get out of jail card frees. None of them ever work. You've always known that. But in that moment, I'm sorry to tell you, there's a little 6-year-old at the wheel of your car driving you in another direction, and you're being pulled along with it. And that's why that A, B, C, it couldn't be simpler than that. My life has been trying to clarify these complications that the inner child does to make it simple steps that you can understand. As you described it, that's exactly what the inner child uses emotions to manipulate you, to get what it wants. The problem is, it's a child. It doesn't know a way out of this. It's hoping it's going to run to his bedroom and an adult will step in and sort it out for them.
I mean, that's the fundamental problem because the inner child, plays these games. We play these games in order to get rid of the emotional feelings which we're actually creating and get rid of the roadblock, because actually most of us would rather not meet roadblocks or problems in our life. I mean, that's a fact.
Of course.
But this is a dangerous game we are allowing ourselves to play because in the short term, we are looking for an excuse to step back. We're looking for an excuse for someone else to come in and sort the problem out. But what happens if we keep playing this game, David? It's almost like we then turn to food, we turn to drinking, we turn to drugs, we turn to overspending, we turn to being an angry person or a withdrawn person. But then that creates another problem, which becomes worse than the original problem.
That's right. And that's why we've developed, as over the years, what we call the golden thread. Because when a client comes to me, and they've layered lots of problems on top of each other, and the golden thread takes you through those layers. That was a great way that you explained it. So when you go down to it, as I've always said, the inner child is not a monster trying to mess up your life, it's not the devil or evil. It's a little scared child that doesn't know how to deal with things. The only tool that this child has is at its disposal emotions. That's all it knows what to do. Create emotions. Create emotions hoping that somebody will take pity on them. Somebody will be kind to them. Somebody won't criticize them. Somebody won't judge them. Somebody won't compare them. Some magic fairy godmother will step in and wave a wand and all that problem will sort out. And that because there's somebody just holding their hand. The problem is reality, that doesn't work. It's never worked. And so you have to change your strategy. That's why the coping mechanism, and we've talked a lot about what is the not coping mechanism. Yeah. The coping mechanism is that you fall back to what I would call Shen. Some people call it their authenticity, their mature side, whatever you want to call it, the adult side. I would call it Shen, your spiritual side, because obviously this situation is very difficult. It's going to be a great challenge to you. But I've seen every situation with every client I've dealt with. When you unpeel all of this, as Alex has just explained, there is a very valuable life lesson for you to learn about yourself as well. Most of these life lessons is really about how you view yourself, how you come into truth, honesty, and integrity, how you walk your walk and talk your talk. And that is normally what these life lessons are teaching you. And if you don't learn them, if you do the avoidance, whatever we've just described, then you never learn them. And that's why the Chinese call it the carousel of despair. It's like you've left your suitcase on the carousel. It'll go around, maybe weeks, maybe months, maybe years, maybe different people, maybe different circumstances, but the same problem. And if you don't think I'm right, think back on your life. Think back on your relationships, think back on your career, and see how the same situations, it's almost like this kind of boss or these friends, they follow you around. They're not following you around. You haven't learned the lesson, and that's what you're choosing. I won't go into this, but look at our videos on the law of attraction. This is what you're attracting in your life because you're not coping.
And so I would imagine, David, when a client comes to you with, say, codependent relationship problems or addiction problems, like in the ones we've already kind of described, that is the presenting problem. But as you say, when you use the golden thread process model that you work with with all your clients, actually the presenting problem isn't the foundational problem. The foundational problem is, what is the thing that this beautiful individual is trying to avoid? Where is the original first avoidance?
Absolutely.
Here? The problem is not the person constantly getting into codependent relationships where they want the person to rescue them and save them from problems. It's not so much about the overeating, the drinking, the drugs. It's about what is this foundational thing? And would you say that thing, that original avoidance, is something that happened in childhood, and then it's set the course from there on in for the inner child to just say, I can't cope with this?
I would say a high majority of the time the first incident happened in childhood. But as you said earlier, there's layers and layers and layers. So something happens and then maybe they're bullied at school, or their first boyfriend or girlfriend cheats on them, or their first job doesn't work out right, or they're slightly overweight, or they've got red hair and people laugh at them. And so it like layers and layers and layers of evidence builds up to kind of prove something it doesn't prove. And that's what I always say about the 3 lies, for instance. I say to all my clients, when they give me, I'm not good enough, I can't cope, I'm unlovable, or I'm unworthy. Same thing. I always say to them, give me the evidence why you are that. They give me the evidence of what thinking that creates. The creation, not the evidence of why they're not good enough. Because I always say, surely you do not believe. Surely you do not believe that you were born not being able to cope. If you've ever been at a birth, however you came down that birth canal, I don't know how you made it if you couldn't cope. So this is something that you've developed. This is something that either someone's told you and you believe them, or something that the first incident that you dealt with, very difficult in your childhood, no one was there to guide you how to deal with it. And how you know if this is you, listen to the words that you're saying to yourself in your mind, even as you're listening to me now, and see if you're making victim statements about you being the victim. Oh, well, it's always me. Oh, it works out me. Why don't people understand that? Why? And this is what people say to me, well, oh, can you tell me, I'm just going to make something up. Can you tell me how to stop eating so much? Could you give me a diet? Could you do this? Could you tell me how to stop this? I'm saying, well, you're choosing to do it. You're making a choice. I just use a food. Nobody forces you to put something in your mouth. Please, I always say to put more in your mouth, but take responsibility for making the choice. And that's where the friction starts, because they want to see themselves as a victim. And a lot of my clients dislike it when they say things to me, well, give me the 1, 2, 3. Tell me what I've got to do. And I say, you are joking, because if I tell you what to do, how long is it going to take you to stop doing it and then blame me? Why don't you take responsibility? And this is why this coping technique that we're talking about is so important. You cannot cope if you're a victim, because you're putting the responsibility onto other people. Do you understand that? How can you cope if you're relying on somebody else to cope for you? You've got to make that choice for your life. You are an awesome human being. I believe you are connected to the universe. You are absolutely amazing. How do you think somebody external to you can come in and tell you how to be living your life?
So we've talked about taking responsibility for the emotions, and don't kind of conflate the situation by bringing the emotions into the actual problem, and understanding that we create those emotions. The situation is not creating the emotions. Initially, we may get a quite natural red light emotional reaction to the situation, but if we are experiencing intense and prolonged red light emotions because of the challenging situation, we need to say, hold on a minute, we don't have to be creating these emotions now. We can step away from them, look at the situation logically. You've talked about the language and the words we use, not using victim statements, because again, that is going to make the situation even worse. And finally, I just wanted to ask you, David, how much, if we can learn to accept that, we don't have to be perfect when we're dealing with this situation. There is the outcome may not be perfect as well. If we can learn to accept that, rather than say, follow the inner child standards of, I have to cope with this perfectly, like a superwoman or a superman, or the outcome of this situation needs to be 100% perfect and it needs to happen quickly, right now, immediately, and on my time scales. They're all the kind of inner child demands. If we can choose to drop those, will that also help us cope better?
Oh, it'll change your life, because now, this is why I like the analogy of the inner child. I'm going to say to you again, the things you say to yourself in your self-talk and the things that come out of your mouth about yourself, you would not say that about your physical child. You wouldn't do it. You're much harder on yourself than you are with anyone else. So I want you to think about that part of your mind as almost like your spiritual child, and you're the spiritual parent. And what we want to do is to bring those two together based on truth, honesty, and integrity. So everything that goes through your self-talk, what I call the 3 a.m. mind, when you wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning and your mind's telling you, when have you ever woken up at 3 a.m. in the mind and is in the morning in bed, and your mind has said to you, aren't you fantastic? Aren't you simply awesome? Tomorrow is going to be a fantastic day. You are going to do that interview. You're going to waltz through it. My goodness, they're going to be amazed with you. Your mind never says that. It says the opposite. Oh, you're putting on weight. Oh, I don't like the way you look. Oh, well, you're going to fail tomorrow. Oh, these people aren't going to. Oh, they're thinking negative about you. And that's the inner child. That is the inner child talking, trying to protect itself, trying to push everybody away, trying to think that if it creates a nice little cotton woolly world where bunny rabbits are running around the field, everybody loves it. But the problem is that is not reality. And you've got to educate your inner child because your physical parents couldn't do it. So it's your responsibility now because you're the spiritual parent. And the more you do that, the more these two parts of you will become one. And as you know, that's why I believe in being a Taoist. You are one. You are awesome. You are amazing. Just be who you are. That spiritual self.
And I think the Shen self-talk, the spiritual self-talk, the authentic self-talk in any challenging situation wouldn't be, oh, well, this is going to go great. This is going to be brilliant. It's just grounded. It's calm. It's realistic. It's like, well, this conversation may not go the way I'd like it to go, but we'll manage, and then we'll take stock, and then we'll take another step forward. It's a lot more calmer and more balanced, less heavy on the emotions.
Well, one thing you will say is we'll learn the lesson if it doesn't go wrong. We call it when we fall off the bike. You get back on the bike as quick as you can and you start pedaling. So that would be the Shen. We learn our lesson. We acknowledge we got that wrong. We learn what we got wrong. We get back on the bike and we start pedaling.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. So we hope you enjoyed this teaching. I will put links in the show notes to lots of other helpful teachings on some of the topics we've talked about here. If you have enjoyed the teaching, please do comment or share it with someone else who you think may also benefit. David works every week with clients all over the world by Zoom video call on exactly these sorts of issues, whether it's the high-level problems we talked about, so those unhealthy avoidance strategies, and then getting to the root of the issue, the original avoidance, which can involve some inner child work. So if you're interested in learning more about David's sessions, I will also put a link in the show notes for you about that too. And finally, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new teachings every week, and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.